Hey everybody, Quantum here, and as promised, we're going to be taking a deeper dive look into our Ruby Amethyst deck, the deck that has been evolving with the Into the Inklands meta, and over the course of this past weekend, which is the third weekend now that we've had Into the Inklands be released, we've seen Ruby Amethyst take a couple of other big tournaments. One thing I will say about that though is while the online Pixelborn tournaments did have a lot of steel representation, steel is very expensive. Again, if you watch my recent market watch, you would see the cost of like Beast Tragic Heroes, Robin Hood, Champion of Sherwoods, etc., Whole New Worlds, whatnot. And people may not have access to that in real life. And so Ruby Amethyst is a decent budget option as well. It's a strong deck still, very consistent. And for that reason, it might be overrepresented in local tournaments compared to steel variants, which obviously would be free to play online in a Pixelborn tournament. One thing I will also say before we get started is I did take this to locals on Sunday. I went 6-0 with Ruby Amethyst. If you want to see that gameplay, with which I did live stream, it is linked in my description. So take a look at that if you want to see some real life gameplay of this deck. Of course, we also have Pixelborn gameplay on our channel as well. Starting off, hopefully this is centered and the lighting is okay because these are double sleeves, so sometimes it can have a glare, but we are playing 4 copies of the Rafiki Mystical Fighter. This is the new 1-drop from Into the Inklands. It is relevant because pairing this with what is being played now in the Exerting Pinocchio, Talkative Puppet, is important, especially on the play. If you can drop this and your opponent, let's say, drops a Cinderella Ballroom Dancer, you can take it out with the Pinocchio on turn 2. Again, it is kind of situational. You only play 2 copies of this, so the odds you see these in combination early game is not necessarily always guaranteed, but even drawing into the Pinocchio in the later games is relevant, or later part of the game is relevant as well. And again, this being a 3 challenger does put a stop to early game questing. It helps you deal with aggro very well, just like Captain Hook does. In the other 1-drop slot, and I'm going to go over some tech options as well, we're opting to play 4 Minnie Mouse. Now, I did consider playing Chernobog's Followers in place of this, but one of the reasons why I've opted to continue to play Minnie Mouse is because on the draw, dropping Minnie Mouse is sometimes stronger. Like the Chernobog with the 1 toughness, like a Let the Storm Rage On or something can out this, being sung by Cinderella, for example. And so you don't get any value off of this. The reason why you would consider Chernobog's Followers is because, without the snake on board or fox, snake or fox in hand, this card usually just sits there and doesn't do anything. But because you do play other things like crab and whatnot, you might be able to get some utility off of this. Generally, though, if you don't have a way to return this to your hand with the bounce card to ink later on, it just sits there because you don't want to quest with it because your opponent outs it for free. Whereas with Chernobog, you can quest with it and banish it to draw a card if it's kind of stuck on the field. But again, Chernobog just having that 1 stat line does make it a little bit weaker. So for that reason, we're sticking with the Minnie Mouse. So very impactful turn 1 decisions to make on what you want to play. In the 2-drop slot, we are playing 4 Snake, of course, still. It's been kind of solidified now in this meta that the Madame Mim package and the Merlin packages are what you want to play. But the 3 Cusco, the 4 Snakes, and the 2 Pinocchio are the packages that we are going with here. Cusco is just a well-rounded card. With Crab, you can boost this up, run it into something, draw a card. Maui's Fish Hook can boost this up as well. Pinocchio combos well with Mim, with the Rafiki, obviously, with Mim Fox or Mim Snake. Any other Thai strength character that you might play, like the Maui, etc. There's a lot of value on this card. Plus, being able to bounce this to resummon and exert is a good play as well. Other tech options in place of some of those 2-drops, if we take a look at our pile here, we've cut Teeth and Ambitions, and while it's not a 2-drop, instead of the Pinocchio, Bannable Hark kind of talked about the Latch Ditch Effort. This is a decent tech option that you could use. It's not recyclable, but because it gives one of your 1-drops like Challenger +2, it means that your Minnie Mouse can out, let's say, Ursula Singer, right? Because it gains +2 Challenger, it runs into the Ursula at 2-3 once you've exerted it and gave a Challenger 2. But again, playing just a couple copies, the odds you see this early game where they would play the Ursula when it's most impactful, it's kind of a long shot. So for that reason, we've opted to cut it. And we're not playing Teeth and Ambitions because the Pinocchio fulfills this role against aggro. Like you shouldn't necessarily need to Teeth, but Teeth is a decent card, especially when you're on the draw, because it can help you deal with things like, again, like a Ballroom Cinderella or something. In the 3-drop slot, we continue to play Madame Mim Fox, still with the 1 non-foil copy. Hopefully, I'll upgrade it to a foil one soon. Now that I know that people will, or not people, but like the deck continues to play the Madame Mim package. It is proving to be very strong this set. Again, the fact that you boost this up with Crab, make it 7 strength, it runs over Queen's Castle as well as anything else, basically. Or you can boost this with the Fishhook as well. Give it evasive with Fishhook, deals with an opposing Minnie Mouse. If people still opt to play that, is very relevant as well. The card continues to be an absolute banger. Speaking of the crabs, we are opting to play 2. I was playing 3, and I do think 3 is a correct ratio, but you'll see why I've reduced this to 2 in just a moment, but it's pretty self-explanatory. On 6 ink, you can drop crab, give something Challenger 3, drop Mim, bounce Crab, give Mim Challenger +3. Like, there are definitely some strong interactive plays that you can make with this. We are still playing 3 Maleficents. There's a case to be made to drop this card. The issue is, you know, the card draw is nice, and just having that body on board that can sing Friends is also nice. Plus, on turn 3, if your opponent doesn't have something that you need to necessarily outright deal with right away, being able to drop this instead of this is nice as well, because you don't always want to lose tempo with board control by bouncing your cards back, especially if you are against steel decks where they're likely going to whole new world shortly after you kind of start bouncing your cards back, and you have less board presence, which makes it better for your opponent to whole new world, right? And you lose advantage. The tech options in the deck, the 2 Maui's Fishhook, pretty standard at this point. I think this card will become pretty much staple. Everyone's running it. It's absolutely necessary, I think. The fact, also because you play like 4 Maui's, so you sometimes play this ability for free. But even if you don't play it for free, yeah, giving evasive to protect your card or take out an evasive threat, or getting the +3 strength to run over something, make some of your weenies like the Cusco bigger to run over something, and of course boost up cards to run over locations is very, very relevant. The card that we've opted to tech in, and again, if you watch my live stream on the Sunday, you saw me playing this already, where I wasn't playing it on Pixelborn like last week. The reason that I've opted to include 2 copies of spellbooks, and they come at the expense of one of those crabs and a Madame Medusa, is because I just can't afford to play a game online or in person and it take like 25 minutes. I don't have a lot of time to play this game, unfortunately, and so if I do play, I want to be able to end my matches fairly quickly. And I'm a player who doesn't want to concede just because it's a grindy game. I actually like grindy games. I just don't have the time to play them. But you're seeing this being teched into more Ruby Amethyst lists as well, just because the longer you go with those games, the higher risk you run of like not only decking out, but like just losing to time, because these matches in competitive settings will be timed. And so having this in the mirror match is very strong, because obviously this puts a clock on the game. It's very hard to play this card correctly, because you know you could be so focused on trying to activate this every turn that you're underdeveloping your board, and your opponent is just going wide enough to just outpace your spellbook. But I think pretty much more or less everybody will be on this at some point in Ruby Amethyst, just because it is so powerful in the mirror match, and the locations just aren't it when it comes to the way you want to gain advantage in this matchup, because everybody's playing Maui and everyone's playing Fishhook. So if you drop a location and they already have Fishbook on board, but you can't interact with to begin with, you just like, do they have a Maui? Do they have a Mim Fox? Something to rush down my location and instantly out it? I lose tempo because of that. So yeah, it can be very dicey. So for that reason, we've opted to include the 2 spell books. There is a case to be made to cut the goats, but I'm opting to continue to play 4 goats and 4 rabbit. I just think goat is too nice. Being able to clutch out like 2 or 3 lore sometimes in a turn, it puts a lot of pressure on the opponent. It sounds weird to say, but it can be considered a bit of a win more card, because especially when you're on the play and you have a tremendous advantage already, like dropping goat just helps you close the game out faster. And so especially if you're playing spellbook, I don't necessarily know if this is really the best option to continue to play right now. But again, as of right now, this is what we're playing with the spellbook. So there's a lot of non-questing lore potential in this deck, which is a good thing. But would there be better utility options? Time will tell. One of the things I do want to go over before I move on is we've cut obviously Peter Pan's Shadow because Maui's Fishhook is just better. If you're going to opt to not play locations, which sounds wild, I think you would want to opt to go back and play 3 Minnie Mouse. There is a case to be made that this card is faster, and because people only play 2 Fishhooks, the odds that they see it when they need it, if you drop this, you know, is not always guaranteed. So if you do get a Minnie Mouse in the mirror match and they can't answer this for a couple of turns, this card is questing for a lot usually, right? Because they'll have no way to interact with it. They don't play Peter Pan Shadow and stuff anymore. There's nothing else in the deck that really gives evasive. And so for that reason, Minnie Mouse can be a very good tech option to return into Ruby Amethyst. The issue is If they do have a fish hook, this card is kind of dead, and it's mostly just going to be ink, unless you really do value getting the 2 lore, and then letting it get banished with basically anything. A goat would run into this by Maui's Fishhook, giving it evasive, etc. The other thing to consider is that another card that we opted to play now in the Madame Medusa just outs this card instantly as well. But again, Madame Medusa costs 6. So, these are some tech options. I mean, you probably don't play Peter Pan Shadow at all anymore. But the Minnie Mouse Surfer is something you could consider. RLS Legacy in the 4 slot as a location, uninkable, like I was talking about with the location problem, being susceptible. I mean, it survives a Mim Fox with a Crab or Mim Fox with a Maui's Fishhook at 7, but your opponent likely has something to finish this off with anyways. Is it really getting you the value it needs? Probably not. In addition to that, you could also opt to play Agrabah. Early on, this card can be decent because it gives you 2 lore and it is inkable. But again, I just think it's overall underwhelming given that it's very easy to out. And then again, we can play a 3rd Crab if we really wanted to instead of spellbooks. But again, I am liking the spellbook tech just for the mirror match. So those are some of the other tech options you can use. But back to the deck list, because now it's more or less straight on from here. The 4 Queen's Castle. And pairing with that on the 5 is Jim Hawkins. Only 2 copies of Jim. This is very interesting to consider because the more I play with this, yes, it is strong, especially when it goes unanswered. But in the mirror match, these cards clog up your hand. And if you attempt to play these cards, first of all, it's going to cost you 5 ink if you do get the combo. But if your opponent just goes Maui, Fishhook, take out the location, yes, you have a Jim for 2, like Quest for 2, sorry, with a 4/4 body. But that's all you established on turn 5. You established a vanilla Jim, and you baited out a Maui that took no damage to take out your location. And you're actually seeing some Ruby Amethyst decks opt to not even include this package at all because it's so weak in the mirror. And given the fact that some steel decks, they are teching options against locations like Rise of the Titans, it's a tough decision to make because they don't necessarily need to use the Rise of the Titans on the location. They can save it for your items. And the spellbooks are uninkable. So it's weaker in the non-mirror match, obviously. But without Benjes being played, really, it does increase the usability of these things. And Fishhook is always inkable. But when you're thinking about non-mirror matches, this setup can be very strong. And, Steel, will they waste the Rise of the Titans on the location? If they have no other answer, yes. But they can still run into it, right, at 7 toughness. The Queen's Castle, if you're playing this deck properly and you know how to play it, which sounds crazy, but it is a tough deck to pilot because you have to know the metagame. You need to play this in a game state where you know that the probability of them having the Maui, because you've either baited it, you've seen them forced to ink it, etc., is low, and you've already been dealing with their board. So they have an underdeveloped board, or you be prepared, you cleared the board out, and you're able to follow up with something like this, right? But again, be prepared. You lose tempo because you spent 7 ink to cast it, hard cast it. They establish a bit of a board afterwards. If you drop Jim Hawkins, can their board deal with this still? Right? It's a tough call to make. But yeah, the more I play test with it, the more I'm thinking I might just cut it because when it's in my hand, it can be clunky. Don't get me wrong. It definitely has won me some games, but are there better utility options? And this is what I mean. I think this deck will continue to evolve. We've already seen some lists reverting back to no locations. 5 Mauis, no need to explain this. Maui's Fishhook, but in general, just Maui's an incredible card. In the mirror match, when this card used to be useless, not useless, but very underwhelming, has become very, very popular and useful now, obviously. 2 Madame Medusas. As I already explained, I've opted to cut 1 copy of it. You probably should play 3, but I'm testing out the 2nd spellbook instead. But this card is just very good. I mean, in the mirror match, it is a little underwhelming, so it's kind of like pick your poison. Do you want to play 3 Madame Medusas to have a better matchup against the non-mirror? Or do you anticipate or play against a lot of the mirror match, and therefore having the 2nd spellbook is definitely more useful? So I think 2 is a decent ratio still. I still saw this card when I needed it. When I was playing 3, I found myself drawing at least 1 early game. Drawing into 2, before turn 6 was just well, I need to ink stuff that I would like to keep because I have this uninkable in my hand or 2 of them in my hand. So I do like 2. It is working out for me. But again, I think the correct ratio should probably be 3. For Be Prepared, I would like to cut this to 2, but I mean, not 2, geez, to 3. But I just think you do need to play 4, because if one gets ripped, if you do end up drawing into one early, which, you know, it's a dead card, it gets Necessities, it gets Ursula Deceivered, you do need to have the ability to draw into it again. And so if you only play 3 copies, you only have 2 left in the deck, your odds go way down that you would find this afterwards, with your draw spells. And yeah, it's really needed against some matchups. Like when Amber Steel Song goes wide, being able to crush their board with the Be Prepared is literally how you win that matchup. Same with Sapphire Steel, right? When they start developing that big board, they gotta hope you don't have the Be Prepared, and if you do, that's how you win the game. Otherwise, you definitely lose, right? And then on the top end, we've opted to keep 2 Maleficent Dragon. I do think that this is not necessary, and it is replaceable. But in the grind game, in top-heavy matchups, this card can really help you establish an advantage or clutch out a win. Not only does it out something on board when it drops, the 7 strength runs over pretty much anything. You know, McDuck Manners are 9. This card plus any other weenie would likely take it out. This with the Maui's Fishhook takes out anything. And if it doesn't get dealt with, it is questing for 2. It is Zeusable, right? Like 5 damage on this will take it out. But hey, you've already gone 2 for 1. You baited out their Zeus, taking out this card. So it's not necessarily a bad card. Maleficent will always be decent, I think. But there might be some better options to play. Aside from that, the only other thing I want to go over is maybe just some other legendary options. The Ursula is a very good card still in the meta. The issue is obviously that it gets outed by the Madame Medusa. And so if people are playing 3 or 4 copies of Madame Medusa, this card is unplayable. If they're only on 2 copies like I am, I think this card is playable. You know, this card only costs 1 more than Madame Medusa. When it drops, it drains a lore and it gives you a draw. And then if it goes unanswered and you quest for 3, like usually you're going to be winning that game. Your opponent has to be pretty far ahead for this card questing not to make an actual difference. So you know, it's a hard call to make. Your opponent's likely not going to expect you playing Ursula. So if you're able to bait out Madame Medusas and stuff like that, you know, having this card to drop. I was testing 2 of these, and I did win my matches with them that I played. I only played 2 matches, and I won both of them. And they were both the mirror match. One was 25 minutes, and one was like 15 minutes. I posted the 25-minute one. Like, my hand was terrible, and I still somehow came back and won. But this card forces your opponent to basically out it, right? So it's going to force the Madame Medusa, it's going to force the Maleficent Dragon, it's going to force to Be Prepared. And if it goes unanswered, like I said, it's very strong. Elsa is an interesting card as well, because at a 4/6 stat line, it survives the Long Game Zeus. It doesn't get Medusa'd. Being able to tap down 2 things is pretty important. With people not playing Tremaines anymore, having this as the only thing on your field isn't necessarily the worst either. And it does quest for 3. How useful is this card going to be? As I tested it as a 1-of, and it was all right. The issue is I seem to always have drawn this in my first like 5 turns when I was playing it, and it just sits in my hand. And you really do want to see this at the end of the game, right? Or when it's actually meaningful, when you can play it. And so I would only play 1 copy at most, but that is an option. I wouldn't really go for more copies of Maleficent Dragon. 2 I think is good, and like I said, there's even a case to cut them. But again, those are just some of the other tech options that you might see. So there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, it's an 18-minute video, and probably gonna be a 20-minute video as we continue to wrap up here. But that is the deck in its current iteration. It will continue to evolve. There will be locationless versions for those people who want to be more geared towards winning the mirror match. The bad matchups this deck continues to have is Emerald Steel. However, like I said, that deck is very expensive to make because you're running 4 Ursula, Deceiver of All, which like at 50, 60 bucks Canadian is 200 bucks. A set of Robin Hoods is another 200 bucks. That's 400. A set of Beast Tragic Heroes is 200 bucks. That's 600 plus everything else you need. You know, if you could run that deck, more power to you. It's not a deck that beats everything. It should beat this, but it loses to like Sapphire Steel and Ember Steel, and Amethyst Steel, because they just outdraw it anyways. And it just has bad matchups into other Steel, right? That's how Emerald is. Emerald and Steel. Steel has bad matchups into Steel itself. The Sapphire Steel is probably the most versatile version of Steel, but it's going to be interesting to see how the meta evolves. If you did enjoy this video, let me know. If you made it this far, a like would be appreciated, and a comment as well. But yeah, let's go ahead and wrap it up because we're getting on to 20 minutes. Yeah, and let me know if you're playing Ruby Amethyst. What are you opting to play? How was your deck teched out? Do you agree with my choices or not? And if you're not playing Ruby Amethyst, let me know what you are playing and if you have a game plan against Ruby Amethyst. So again, thank you for watching. Quantum is out.